Welcome back to ESG Decoded. I'm your co-host for today, Amanda Hsieh, and today I have with me Saskhia Menendez. Saskhia is an equality diversity ambassador, researcher, public speaker, mentor, and social change activist. She works to help diversify the music industry landscape as well as help improve representation, access, educate, and inform people of the issues and barriers certain underrepresented groups face. She's a multiracial trans woman who transitioned 12 years ago, is a parent of 2 children, and has over 10 years of experience in the music industry. She's also in the process of making some brand new tracks, which we're excited for, and due to release next year. Her name may sound familiar because she's also the co-host or the host of the Equality and Diversity in the Music Industry podcast. Saskia, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here, and can't wait to hear more about your perspectives about what's happening in the music industry, what kind of needs to change as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of our listeners, we have some folks, probably a few folks familiar, but I want to say majority of our listeners probably don't know what's happening. And we'd love to hear from you as an insider. What's going on right now? What are you
Okay.
seeing?
I think that's a really great question. I think there's a lot of change going on in the music industry at the moment. It's a really dynamic time. I think now with the explosion of social media and all the kind of different tools that we have to promote music, the music industry is always evolving and it's very fast paced and it's very competitive. So now what we're finding is that more and more underrepresented and disadvantaged communities are being highlighted, are being role modeled, and also having that representation and visibility, which is extremely important because the music industry as a whole has always generally been run by generally cis white males that are quite old. So that means that generally most of the representation was coming through from white cis men or white cis women. And even women in the music industry are completely underrepresented too. So it's kind of like looking at the industry as a whole and saying, okay, what can we do here to kind of make a positive change and a positive difference? So now what's starting to happen is we're getting people in more higher roles, we're getting more diverse applicants coming through the talent pipeline, we're getting more communities that are now being represented and have that visibility. And we're also educating people on the issues and the barriers that a lot of these underrepresented and disadvantaged communities face, which I think is extremely important. Because obviously, if we don't educate people on what some of these issues and barriers are, then firstly, people don't know how to kind of support those people. And then secondly, it's kind of making sure that when we are supporting those people, that it's beneficial to everybody, including them.
And I think this is, something that even though we're talking about the music industry, I think it can apply to other industries as well.
Yeah.
So it's not, of course, we're talking using this kind of industry as the one that you're been involved with all your life. But again, I think this applies to almost every industry out there. Something I was thinking about is it's not only artists, but as you mentioned, record labels and all the way through kind of every player that it takes a lot of people to produce music and to release it out in the world and everything to get it to like our consumers' ears, let's say. And what I'm hearing is also that it's really across kind of all the different roles too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm seeing more representation, I think, for artists than the music business itself. Now, this is another thing I'm looking at is the way we actually map the diversity and inclusion in the music industry. Because again, an artist can come in, they have more creative control and power of what they want to do and where they want to go. But then when you actually look at the business side of things, you have to go through an education, you have to spend money, it takes a long time. The power dynamic's not the same. So again, I've noticed that actually in the performance side of the industry is a lot more diverse than what the actual business side of the industry is. And this is another great point you make. It's all across the music industry, actually. So we're trying to get music industry companies, record labels, organizations, everybody to try and have at least 2 or 3 people on their board that are also employed by them, that are people of color, that are from disadvantaged or underrepresented communities, because we need that visibility. Because I believe that if you don't see yourself in one of those roles, then you feel that you're not welcome, or it's not a place that you'd feel included. And so I think that's one of the other important reasons why we need to do this change, because we should be supporting the communities in which we live, but we should also be kind of representing those communities as well.
I think it's especially in industry that influences culture around the world.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, representation matters, and to see yourself and see, I could do that too. If I work hard, have the talent, everything, if I really work hard and try, I can do this too. I think that's so important because otherwise we also feel like, well, why would I even try that, right? Why would I even try? Why would I even apply?
Exactly. And this is one of the points that I think and it's also off-putting to people that are from those communities to actually feel isolated at times, because I've been there myself. Like, I've been into many rooms where I've been the only trans person or the only person of color, or the only person that might be neurodivergent in the room. And sometimes you've also got to look at intersectionality as well, and how that kind of impacts people, their opportunities, and how they can progress as well. So I think it's also about looking at different differences and nuances and the complexity of life, because I think it's really about having diversity to reflect that and reflect where we're from and the struggles and the barriers that we face. Because I think through music we can also tell a story, which is really beneficial, so other people can kind of get that too. And I think that's also another way of kind of educating and empowering others.
Something that you, I know, have mentioned to me is this phrase, authentic proportional representation.
Yeah.
For our listeners who may not, will you unpack that phrase?
Yes, of course I will. So I'll start with the authentic representation. So that basically refers to the accurate and respectful portrayal of individuals, of groups, across various forms of media, actually, such as literature, film, television, and art, and all cultural expressions. And it's about representing people and their experiences in a way that's true to their identities, backgrounds, and lived experiences. So, authentic representation aims to avoid stereotypes, cliches, and harmful tropes and biases. Instead, it strives to reflect the diversity and the complexity of real people. So, there are some key principles there. So, it's about being inclusive, it's about being accurate, it's about using empathy and respect, it's about consulting and collaboration. So, it's always about talking to those communities and kind of involving those communities and kind of working with them on a grassroots level so you can really understand some of the issues and barriers and learn as well at the same time. And also avoiding harmful tropes and stereotypes, and just storytelling with integrity, I think is really, really important too. So that's kind of the authentic representation. And then when you look at proportional representation, it's basically trying to represent the communities in which we live. So, for example, we have around 50% women, well, 51% women, 48%, 49% male population. So, really, the music industry should be reflecting that, but then also breaking it down into other groups and saying, okay, we have a percentage of Asian, we have a percentage of Black, we have a percentage of trans that's also represented as it would be in the communities in which we live, which I think is fair. It represents where we're from, but it also enables everybody to share from other people's experiences and also have that knowledge sharing base that we could all learn from each other from, I think is crucial.
Now, I know you're involved in a lot of activities to make change, and I want to hear some more. I think you've already hinted at some of the things that you're working on, but I want to hear more about this.
Oh, thank you. So, yeah, firstly, I'm a board of directors at the F List. So, the F List is an amazing organisation based in the UK, and it's a directory for female and gender diverse individuals to come and join. It's free. We also kind of do collaborations, funding opportunities, partnerships, events, and research as well, because I also do research, and I think research is really important because there are lots of gaps in data. There's also lots of gaps in data collection. So, until we get the data, I think it's very hard to be able to measure something and then to be able to see where we've progressed. So I think firstly it's about gaining the correct data, making sure we have that data and then working on that data to improve what we already have.
I've heard that comment from other people I've spoken to in the music industry as well, is that right now, I mean, there is a lot of technology that can collect metadata and collect the data, which is we're not tracking
So,
um, the information that we really want to track to see where we are and how we can make change. But the
yes,
technology is there, is really just kind of getting the processes to
that's right.
change.
100%. And also looking at it intersectionally as well, because I think, sometimes we have to understand that people are complex and we're all individual. So it's about catering for the individual rather than just saying one size fits all, which is what's often happened in the past, which doesn't work for everybody and it doesn't support people in the right ways. So basically, I think that's a good way of understanding obviously some of the issues and barriers. But when someone's intersectional, that means that each time they face a barrier, it then multiplies because you haven't got one barrier, you've got two, three, then four. So it makes it a lot harder to succeed, to progress, or to even get those career opportunities that you're looking for if you are intersectional. So I think that also needs to be tracked and looked at as well.
Exactly. I want to get your thoughts about this as well, because something that we've talked about is how there are different organizations advocating for more diversity for specific groups. But I think what we've spoken so much about is the intersection of these groups, of how can we make sure that there is proportional representation, not only when it comes to gender, for example, or racial or ethnic, but really the intersection of all this. What do you think needs to change to improve?
I think that's a great question, actually. And I think it needs to be kind of looked at a different way. So I think education is part of it, right? It's having education and that knowledge base. It's about sharing information, I think, is another important part. But it's also, I think, a learning curve for everybody to try and understand and get their heads around, okay, what are these issues? What are these barriers? And how we can actually support people in a more, I think, in a more friendly and bespoke way, because I think sometimes I think I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry and they feel a lack of support in certain areas. And it is a shame, especially with people with disabilities or neurodivergence. They often forgotten about or they're not included. So also about having those allies as well to speak up and say that there are people missing. But I think really for the intersectionality part, it's about education and the representation and visibility is really going to help change that. But I don't really know what else we could do at this moment in time apart from collect the data and analyze it and see how we can kind of support people better, to be honest.
When you speak to the community, to other artists and other folks in the music industry, what are you hearing from them as like kind of their feedback?
I think a lot of artists are actually working for free or for very little money. And especially when I speak to female artists, I think sometimes they're afraid to have children or take time off or to even put on weight. There's a lot of kind of pressure put on women in the music industry as well to look a certain way, the image. I think people are also scared to take time off because if they do take time off, then they might be forgotten or they think that someone else will come along. And so I think it's very competitive. But I do think that people in the industry are there because they're very passionate about what they do. They love what they do. So I think that's really what keeps a lot of people there. And I am from my own personal experiences, things are improving. I think they're improving a lot, but we need to do a lot more, I think, to make sure that we're really inclusive and diverse. But we're getting there.
One thing you mentioned that the artists may have more power than they think.
Yeah,
Can you, so, for artists who, what should they be asking for? What should they be demanding?
I think that's a great question too. I think it's about having diverse teams. It's about having diverse teams around you. It's about when you're on stage, having diverse people up on that stage with you. It's about including others and being part of different communities and charities that you can show that your support for and speak up for them. I think that's really important. And that power is there for the artist. So an artist has artistic expression, so their artistic expression is theirs. They can choose what kind of charities or what kind of causes they like, and they can kind of tailor that to their own personalities, which I think is really, really nice. But it's also about being authentic with that as well, and ensuring that you are actually doing something that you believe in and that you're passionate about.
Do you think that, how do I say this? I've heard it said the democratization of music production, basically being easier to produce music as an artist. You don't have to rely on a label. Of course,
True.
there's many benefits, but you don't have to. You can self-publish. You can self-promote. Has that made it, I don't know, better, harder? I don't know. What do you think?
I think it has become more competitive actually, because I think barrier is a lot lower to entry now. So people can sit in your bedroom and you can make music, whereas before a lot of the control was with the labels. So unless you had a record deal, then you wasn't necessarily being able to make music. But nowadays anyone can make music, and I think there's over 100,000 songs a day uploaded to Spotify. So can you imagine how much competition there is out there? And there's a lot of noise, right? And it's about breaking through that noise. It's about being authentic and it's about being original, but also finding your tribe. I think is extremely important, and finding your people and staying true to that.
And then I wanted to ask you about Key Change. I think this is an organization that you mentioned to me that's working, um, I think in the, if I remember right, Europe and in the US and across some other, but tell
Yeah.
us more about that organization.
So Key Change is fantastic. I've been part of that for a year now, and I'm an innovator of Key Change. So it's around 12 countries in the Europe and the US, no, in Canada and the UK as the European base. We've just opened a new one in America, so it's now becoming more of a worldwide organization. We have 74 participants in the European one, so it's been going for 5 years now. We have a gender 50-50 representation, so we get people to sign a pledge, which is really, really important. So we have around 600 organizations that have signed to the pledge to have this 50-50 gender representation. We're also getting more and more people up on the stage now. More females artists are now headliners on stage, which I think is really important. Because looking at last year in the UK, I think there was only 13% of female headliners. So again, making this kind of educating people on this and also getting people to initiate a change and sign a pledge, I think is really good. Yeah, there's 12 countries involved. So we all learn from different countries. We all get to travel to those different countries as well and do talks, which is fantastic. And we make meaningful relationships across the industry. So some of us are artists and some of us are innovators from the business. So it gives us a good kind of an all-round view of the industry. So you can look at performers and you can look at the business side. And then we kind of come together and say, okay, what policies need to change? What can we do to kind of advise policymakers on here to ensure that we do get this diversity and inclusion? Because I think that's really what Key Change is about. And it's a fantastic organization. So please do check them out.
Awesome. I want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. On your podcast, I love it how you interview guests and what is it like to be, fill in the blank. um, Tell me about, you've interviewed so many people. Um, like, what are your main takeaways or reflections from talking to so many folks?
I think, do you know what? I've really enjoyed doing my podcast. It's called Music Industry Insights Worldwide, and I'm now on volume 3. So I've now interviewed around 30 guests on my show. They're all from different kind of different professions in the industry and also from different countries. So what I've learned is actually each country is unique to itself. So each country has its own challenges rather than it being a worldwide issue. It's a country by country issue, which does make things a little bit more complex to solve. But then again, when you're looking at it from a worldwide perspective, you can then compare different countries. And then you can also compare people, say, for example, that are Asian in the UK, that might be Asian in the US, and say, okay, what similarities are there here? And what differences are there here? And if anything's working in one of those countries, is trying to incorporate that into another country and seeing if that would work. If not, trying to make something that kind of works. I've really enjoyed meeting all the guests on my show because they're fabulous. And it's just about learning about their own unique experiences and their challenges. I found that really, really rewarding, actually, and to just find out how they've progressed and what barriers they've overcome, and kind of to inspire other people as well from their communities. I think it's really, really important to, when I have a platform, I did the podcast because I wanted to make myself an opportunity at the time. And it's also nice to provide an opportunity to other people because sometimes there are those lack of opportunities for underrepresented and disadvantaged communities. And that's something else that I realized. And by doing this show, it kind of educates people, informs people of the barriers, it empowers communities, it builds those meaningful relationships. And it's also there to kind of just look back at and say, okay, what else can we do here and what more do we need to do? And we can measure that as well. So I'm really, really pleased with the show. I'm really excited for what's more to come. So the next one's going to be out next Monday. So I'll be releasing them again from next Monday onwards. Yeah, and I'm really, really excited to share more stories.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to listen to the new volume. Saskia, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Amanda.